We are very fortunate to live on the North Carolina coast in a beautiful beach town, but living in a southern beach town also means you have endless summers. Just today, at the end of September, it was 91 degrees and humid outside. So, to be able to enjoy autumn here, it has to be created and handcrafted, which lends itself to the pleasures of an old fashioned fall at home. We really enjoy outdoor cooking this time of year. My husband always has the smoker going. He usually has a pork butt on there. Sometimes he does a chuck roast. But one of our favorite things to grill is pizza. So I am making a big batch of sourdough pizza dough to put in the freezer. So that way, all fall long, we can just pull from that and make our favorite autumn pizzas. This is my freezer friendly sourdough pizza dough recipe. You can find that over on my blog at moonandmagnolia.com. I'm making a double batch, but for a single batch, you would use 100 grams of sourdough starter, 500 grams of all purpose flour, 100 grams of whole wheat. I used fresh milled hard red wheat, but you could use whatever type of fresh milled flour you want, or even store bought whole wheat flour, 350 grams of water, 10 grams of salt, and 30 grams of olive oil. And what I like to do with this, just so it's easier to work with, is I'll initially mix all of the ingredients together and then I divide it in half and knead it in the mixer in two parts. So that way it just doesn't overwork the mixer. I've done double batches. I've even done a triple batch and it worked, but this is actually just a little bit easier and it's definitely better on the motor for the mixer. And then once both halves are fully kneaded, I just combine them and put them in one oiled bowl to bulk ferment for most of the day. And now I know that pizza dough doesn't necessarily scream autumn, but what it does do is it allows us to have an easier path to enjoying some of our fall activities we like to do as a family. We love to cook outside, and like I said, we love to grill pizzas, but I can't make a homemade pizza dough on a whim any night that we just want to have a pizza on the grill. So by doing this now and freezing it for later, it really supports our ability to enjoy fall, especially in a few weeks or a month or so when it's a little bit cooler and we can really enjoy spending time together outside. When grilling these pizzas, I really like to make a fall harvest pizza. You can also find this recipe over my blog at moonandmagnolia.com, but essentially you just use an olive oil, red pepper, and garlic base, and then you top it with cheese, butternut squash, a little bit of caramelized onion, bacon, blue cheese, and thyme, and then you finish it with a little bit of balsamic glaze, and it is so delicious. Fall is the season for everything cozy and comforting in the kitchen, so cooking from scratch is one of the most useful ways to embrace an old fashioned lifestyle. Whether that means you're freezing pizza dough for grilling your favorite pizzas on a cool evening, or if it means you're just making your favorite soup for dinner, making food from scratch is an old fashioned and timeless skill. And I know that seems kind of simple, but between now and through the end of the holidays, we are inundated with social and commercial pressures to buy food, to buy pumpkin spice lattes, to get the latest pumpkin spice product at the grocery store. But making food at home and sharing it with the people you love has stood the test of time as one of the best ways to build memories, connect with others, and enjoy what this season has to offer. As we head into these darker, cooler days when we spend more time indoors, it's really easy to fall into the modern trap of scrolling on your phone, zoning out, and staring at a screen. So, to avoid this in the evenings, I have been trying to learn how to do hand embroidery, which is definitely an old fashioned skill. In fact, one of my friends even said I've turned into a true grandma, but I will own it. I definitely have. Finding time for a hobby is already hard enough in our modern lives, but if you aren't organized with your hobby, it's even harder. So I'm trying to get all of my embroidery stuff at least just a little organized in this little table that we have in our living room. I've been doing these beginner kits from different brands like Clever Poppy, and there's another one called Julius Brodery that I've been getting beginner kits from. So I'm just getting the kits organized, putting them in one place, so that way in the evening I can very easily just pull the embroidery that I'm working on out and get to business. Now that it's dark out earlier, when my daughter gets to bed, I really like to listen listen to an audiobook while I'm working on my embroidery, or sometimes my husband and I will also watch a show. Right now we're watching The Summer I Turned Pretty, which isn't my favorite show, but it was filmed right here in our hometown. So it's been really fun to work on something creative and old fashioned, but also see my hometown on a TV show. But with that, I'm also trying to use these pieces that I'm embroidering to decorate my home. I remember when I was a kid, homes felt a little bit cozier to me. I have a lot of nostalgia about this. Maybe it's just because I'm getting older, but they felt a little more handcrafted and softer and cozier. So I'm really focusing this fall on bringing some of that softness and coziness back into our home. This is a great time of year for small projects and creating something with your hands. Summer is filled with big projects like gardening and food preservation, vacations, those sorts of things. But fall is a time to settle in and lean into the sweetness of nostalgia. Every other embroidery project I've been doing is for my daughter. So I'll do one for myself, either one to learn new stitches or one pattern that I just really want to do and put in our home. And then I do one for her. So I am hanging up the latest one in her room and just rearranging things to make her room feel cozy. And that way she has her mama's embroidery to look at and hopefully keep forever. And on the back of them, I put little love notes for her too. One of the questions I'm asked the most about sourdough is how much sourdough starter do you need to keep on hand? And the honest answer to that is you really need to keep as much on hand as you want or as much as you will use. But fall is the beginning of the season when I start making a lot of sourdough starter because baking season is here and I want to make sure that I always have starter around so I can bake whenever I want to. I don't always cook from scratch on a whim. I rely a lot on freezer meals and those sorts of things. But in the fall and winter, I do bake on a whim a lot. And I think baking is one of the most rewarding and fun old-fashioned skills you can cultivate. There's a YouTube channel I like to watch called Early American, and on that channel, they make recipes out of cookbooks from the 1800s. And the thing I like about it, when they get to the baking recipes, you see that not much has changed. Sometimes things have gone out of fashion, but baking is a timeless tradition that we can share through generations. I suppose you could say the same thing about cooking, but there's something about baking with my daughter versus, say, I don't know, cooking a steak with my daughter, where baking just sits on my heart a little bit differently, and I think it does hers too. Here we are making sourdough discard apple cider donuts, and I have this recipe over my blog at moonandmagnolia.com. I will leave a link for that below in the description box. But first, you just take a cup of apple cider and you reduce it down to about a half a cup. And then it's pretty much like any other baked good where you mix the dry ingredients, cream, the butter, and sugar. I always recommend adding the egg and the sourdough discard at the same time because the egg helps that discard mix in, and then you mix everything together. I have a recipe for fried sourdough donuts that are killer over on my blog too, but what I like about these baked versions is that it's easy to make with my daughter. It's really hard to knead dough and of course fry dough with a small child, but this is something that we can really easily make and do together and create those memories. And of course, we go out to the fall festivals when the weather starts to cool off, and there's always food trucks and donut trucks, and that's fun. We like to do those things too, but it really feels special to make these things at home. When you make these donuts, I do recommend using a piping bag or even a Ziploc bag just to put it in the donut pan. That makes it a little bit easier, but otherwise, if you have baked a cake, you can make these donuts for sure. Once the donuts are in the oven, I just bake them at 350 for about 15 minutes, and when they're cool enough to handle, I brush them with a little bit of butter and a mixture of cinnamon and sugar. You could definitely skip that part, but it's way better with them. But I will say, the last time I made these, I had a sugar that was a little more finely ground, and it worked better for that topping. My daughter kept calling these crunchy donuts because we kind of have a coarse ground sugar right now. So if you have a finely ground granulated sugar, that would work better, but it'll be delicious either way. I had to take my daughter to gymnastics, so we didn't finish all of the donuts, but I'll show you in a minute how you can use that batter just to turn them into really easy muffins for a quick breakfast. The thing about cultivating old-fashioned skills in a modern home is that they have to be simple and they cannot be disruptive, especially I think this time of year. I always say that the moment our birthdays hit in September, my husband and I were both born in September, 3 days apart. The moment our birthdays hit, it is like a race to the end of the year, and I hardly have time for anything else. So it almost seems comical to say, like, oh, we'll just make donuts at home and just make a bunch of pizza dough and learn how to embroider. But the truth is, you can do those things, but when you say yes to those things, you have to say no to something else. And I am saying no to making dinner from scratch every single night. And instead, I am relying on freezer meals. So, more than a month ago, I think it's been about a month and a half ago, I made 50 freezer meals and I put that on YouTube. I'll leave a link for that in the description box too. But I am using those freezer meals now so I can do things that I want to do throughout the fall, like work on my embroidery, do things like baking with my daughter, or in this case, packing up sourdough pizza dough for the freezer. So while I'm packing up this scratch made pizza dough for the freezer, I have a chicken and gravy freezer meal on the stove warming up. I put it in a bowl of water earlier in the day. It was still a little bit frozen, so I just put it in the pot with a little bit of milk, put it on low, and then covered it so it can come to temperature. And that kind of handles itself while I pack up the pizza dough. I have a total of 8 pizza doughs to pack up, so I just shape them in a ball, put each one in a sandwich bag, and then put all those sandwich bags in a Ziploc bag and stick it in the freezer for later use. And then I serve that chicken and gravy with a little bit of toast. I have that bread in the freezer and some frozen peas, and that was dinner. I feel like we can't talk about an old fashioned fall or fall in general without a soup. So I really love to make soups all year long, but of course, fall is the season for soup. And I am making a one pot sausage, kale, and white bean soup. This recipe will be available on my blog soon. I will leave a date for its availability in the description box. This is a really easy recipe. You just brown some sweet Italian sausage in a pot, throw in some carrots, onions, and celery, saute them until they are translucent, then add in some garlic, and then I like to throw in chopped potatoes, some chopped kale, 2 cans of white beans, and 8 cups of chicken broth, and then you bring it to a boil and let it simmer for about 30 minutes or so, or until those potatoes are tender and the kale is cooked. When I make soups like this, I like to use them to set the tone for the day. Our mornings have been cool. Some of our mornings have even been in the 50s. So I like to make the soup in the morning to cozy up the house. It makes it smell good. And then I let it sit in the fridge all day and it just kind of marinates in there. And it tastes even better and better the longer it sits. And then I warm it up in the evening and I didn't really have to do much because dinner was made earlier in the day. And then for that leftover donut batter, I just let it sit in the fridge all night. And because it has sourdough discard in it, what's cool about that is it's actually slowly fermenting those grains while it sits in the fridge. And in the morning, I just pulled the batter out. I put some muffin cups in a tin, filled them up with that batter, and I put them in the oven and baked them. I'd say I baked them for probably closer to 25 minutes. It's more batter than what the donuts were, and also it was cold, so it had to bake a little bit longer. And for the sake of time on a busy fall morning, I skipped brushing it with butter and coating it in sugar and cinnamon. But the soup and using that donut batter as muffins were both really easy recipes that cozied up our home and flavors for the day. And that's some of what's been happening around our home this fall so far. I hope these ideas offered you some inspiration for cultivating simplicity in your home this autumn. Thanks so much for stopping by.